When I first moved to France, I thought I had a pretty good grasp of food. After all, I grew up in the New York City metropolitan area, and you could find a huge variety of cuisines and ingredients from all over the world. I figured, well, how different could it be in France? Well, I was in for a surprise. Bonjour tout le monde, welcome back to We in France. I'm Diane. And as we know, French food culture is its own unique, delicious universe. There are things here that are completely foreign to an American kitchen, not just in terms of flavors, but also in how these foods are cooked, served, and even thought about. Now, I quickly learned that my idea of gourmet was a little different from the French way, and that I had a lot to learn about how food is thought of and prepared in France. I would also learn how simple, everyday foods could be turned into something so much more. But before I get into my list, I just want to point out that some of the items I mentioned are probably cultural, and some are specific to my particular upbringing and location growing up in the northeast part of the United States. Now, plenty of Americans might be huge fans of the foods that I'm going to get into, and you might eat them often. But for me, they just weren't foods that I was familiar with back in suburban New Jersey growing up. I guess it's a matter of just different strokes for different folks. And there are all kinds of different ethnic foods, things like Indian foods, chili peppers, just other dishes that I would regularly eat back in New York City that the average French person would not be familiar with. So it works both ways. Foods are definitely not universal around the globe. But with that, I want to get into 5 foods that I had never eaten or even tried, or at least, let me say this, at least ones that weren't in regular rotation in my household growing up. And heck, some of them I never even heard of until I moved to France. So, number 1, rhubarb. Now, this is a little bit of confession time. I had no idea what rhubarb, in its natural state actually looked like before moving to France. If someone had shown me a bunch of rhubarb stalks back home, I probably would have said something, and I admit, as an adult, like, wow, that's some really cool red celery. And, just as a naive 20-something, rhubarb was not a vegetable I saw often on menus or in grocery stores in the United States, aside from maybe a jam flavor or a type of pie. And even then, rhubarb seemed to be a little bit more like an old-fashioned ingredient that would show up in one of your grandma's recipes. I don't even think I'd even tasted it until I came to France. But here, rhubarb is pretty mainstream, especially in desserts and preserves, and I do see it when it's in season in the spring and early summer at farmers markets. Now, my first introduction to it was the classic tarte à la rhubarbe, a tart filled with sweetened rhubarb that's slightly tangy, but still absolutely delicious, especially when it's packed with sugar. I've had it in jams, compote, even paired in I guess it's called a crumble or like a dessert with strawberries. Now, French people love that balance between sweet and sour, and I feel like rhubarb just delivers that perfectly. And I personally find it fascinating to see how the French take something that maybe many nationalities would overlook and turn it into a culinary star. I never knew a vegetable would make such a great dessert. Well, I shouldn't say that, aside from pumpkin pie, which I love, especially this time of year. And also, P.S., if you don't know, in 1947, the USDA classified rhubarb as a fruit because the import tariffs were lower on fruits than vegetables, but it is a vegetable. My verdict on this one? Delicious. All right, number 2, endives. Endives. They're a perfect example of just a kind of ingredient that I'd walk right past in the US. In a US grocery store, I probably didn't even really know much about what endives were, how to prepare them. Figured they'd be next to the lettuce or something. But if you're not familiar with them, they're slightly bitter, crunchy, little lettuce-looking like things that I really had no clue what to do with until I moved to France and learned about their true potential, in a way. In the US, salads tend to be made with either iceberg, romaine, spinach, mixed greens, those kinds of things. But in France, you'll actually find endive salads. I wouldn't say they're popular, but they're around. And the most famous endive dish you'll find in France is the endive au jambon, which is basically endives wrapped in ham, baked with a bechamel sauce and cheese. So if you want to talk about comfort food, that right there is perfect. And what happens, the endive's bitterness, it contrasts really well with the richness of the ham and the sauce and the cheese. And at first, I wasn't really sure if I loved the bitterness or not, but after a while, I came around to it, and I really do appreciate how the French use these strong flavors and put them into balance. Also, endives are really versatile. You'll find them raw in salads, you'll find them lightly braised alongside fish or meats, and they're classic French. So I'm glad that I've learned about them. That said, they're not my favorite thing, but when cooked the right way, I do appreciate them. So my verdict on this one is so-so. All right, number 3, leeks. Leeks were not entirely new to me because my dad would make a special leek and watercress potato-based soup every Christmas. It was a tradition in our household, so I knew what they were. But generally speaking, leeks aren't something Americans just pop out for like a Tuesday night dinner. They're more for, I don't want to say special occasions, but adults would definitely know what leeks are if they saw them in the supermarkets. I would say most adults. But your average American 6-year-old, for example, would not be able to tell you what a leek looks like, or if you held one up, they wouldn't be like, oh yeah, leek. It's definitely not as commonplace as, say, a carrot or an onion. If you held one of those up to a kid, they would know. But in France, it's a whole different story. Leeks are very commonplace. Most young kids would know what leeks are. They eat them in quiches, soups, side dishes. They're very well known to kids and adults, just like a potato or a carrot would be. And the French, at least the ones who like to cook, that is, they have like this knack for turning basic ingredients into something more elegant maybe and more delicious than you'd expect. I've been surprised many times. Like I said, leeks will show up in side dishes and soups and quiches, and you'll find them in French markets too. There'll be huge, beautiful leeks in the fall, and I've grown to love their mild taste even more, and I eat them pretty regularly here. And in case you're wondering, in French, they're called les poireaux, les poireaux. My verdict? Delicious. All right, the French, pate. Now let's talk about it. Before moving to France, my idea of pate was vague at best. Sounds kind of like potty, like I don't even know why you would want to eat that. But in the US, it's not something most people eat unless you're in a fancy restaurant or shopping at a specialty store. It just sounds fancy, right? And people kind of think of it as like maybe an older, old school dish, something weird, or just something you eat at very specific occasions. But in France, pate is everywhere. It's not just for the holidays, it's for casual picnics, family dinners, whenever you feel like it, really. And there are a lot of kinds. So if you're not familiar with pate, it's a mixture of seasoned ground meat, seafood, poultry, even vegetables, kind of cooked down into a spreadable texture. So not something you really need to bite into, it's spreadable. Now sometimes it's cooked in a pastry shell and sliced. I feel like my father-in-law, the older generation, they seem to eat that a little more than younger folks. And other times it's something you spread with a knife, onto bread. And there are a ton of varieties. So at first I was hesitant. I was like, how good could spreadable meat be? Something that sounds like potty. But after giving it a try, I actually liked it. So my verdict, delicious. All right, next, number 5, the Budan BL. Now this one falls into that foods I'd never heard of category. It was something I only learned about once I moved to France, and it was at my in-laws' house for a Sunday lunch brunch type of thing. And I'll admit I was a little nervous. The only boudin that I had heard of was boudin noir, which is blood sausage. And eating that once, I have to say, sorry, but that was enough for an entire lifetime. Although Tom, my French husband, he loves boudin noir, and I believe it's also popular in the French Caribbean. But as it turns out, I was nervous for no reason. Boudin blanc, it doesn't have any blood in it, and it's very, very delicious. If you've never had it, here's what it is. Basically translates to white sausage, or if you're in the UK, I believe it's white pudding. And it's a sausage made from pork, chicken, or veal, and is mixed with milk, breadcrumbs, seasoning, and it's light in color, not our traditional sausage color, and it's delicately flavored. That's important. It's nothing like your typical American sausage. It's not greasy. In fact, it is so smooth and light. I was actually surprised the first time I tried it, in a good way. And it's something you'll see a little more often around the holidays. There are different varieties, but it is available all year round at markets and supermarkets. Now, boudin blanc, the dish is subtle, almost creamy, and it's a little more refined, I think, than you'd expect just by looking at it. I think it's really comforting with a mashed vegetable like creamy potatoes, pairs nicely with an apple compote. But just one word of warning, if you're in a rush to cook it, just slow down. You want to cook it low and slow on the stove, turn it regularly so it cooks evenly. If you blast the heat and you want to cook it quickly, trust me, been there, you will burn it. The inside will be cold. You'll ruin it. But when it's well done, meaning not cooked by me, it's a meal that'll make you feel right at home, whether that's in France or somewhere else. And if you can, if you want to try it, you're here in France, go to a butcher shop. Don't get your first try from a supermarket. You're just going to have better quality meat. It's not industrial if it's from the butcher, so pay a few euros extra. Get it from a butcher. And as you'd expect here, based on what I said, my verdict, Boudin Blanc, absolutely delicious, but Boudin Noir, disgusting. And, one of the best things about living in a new country is discovering things you'd never experienced back home, or at least not in the same way, and that includes food. French food culture, I found, it celebrates things like bitter vegetables, savory pate, sausages, simple things, in ways that can be surprising at times, but also, as we've seen, delicious. So just as an American in France, I've learned that food is not just about what's on the plate. It's about tradition. It's about culture and an appreciation for flavors that I never knew I needed in my life. Also, if you like these kind of topics, you can watch this video about my favorite French mealtime habit. And tell me, next time you're wandering through a French market or looking at a menu and spot something unfamiliar, are you likely to be brave and try it, or stick with something you know? I encourage you to go for it. You never know. It could become one of your favorite foods. And if not, well, you'll have a really great story to tell. I have many. I just want to encourage you, let me know below in the comments. Leave one. Let me know what foods you've discovered on your trips, or if you've moved to France, if you identify with anything I've said here. And of course, bon appétit, mes amis. I'll see you back here on We in France soon. Salut!